It's September 29th, 2001. This is Elizabeth Townsend doing an interview with Chuck Blanchard Dean Massar was preparing for Lives in the Law Project. All right, we're going to start with the first question, which is why did you go to law school, and was it what you expected when you got there?
Well, I was a science major in college, and so I was all geared to go to biochem grad school. And then my junior year in college, I went overseas. I went to Poland, and I had a full semester, basically 6 months, basically, the spring and the summer, of doing no science, not being in the lab, studying history, political science. Came back, started doing lab work, and realized that I loved to study science, but life doing it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I instead wanted to do something that would use history, political science, and be an active participant in the world. And I figured, well, law school's a way to do that. So I applied to law school, was a walk-on to the LSAT, so you could do that at that time, and went to law school. And it was completely different than what I expected. I expected it to be far more dull and rule-oriented, and I found it to be a lot more intellectually stimulating, more philosophically focused, and I also found it to be a much more cooperative environment than I was expecting.
Interesting. And what years did you go to law school?
1982 to 1985.
Why did you go to Poland?
I went to a college that had folks that had programs that would send 20 students to various countries, and it would differ every year. And I thought if I went overseas, I could always go to France or England. By the time Poland was behind the Iron Curtain, it was a communist country. I thought it was a unique opportunity to study, in a Eastern Bloc country and get that perspective. And it was a great choice. I mean, it was a fascinating program, and I was there in 1980. And so I left in August of 1980, the day before the big strikes in Gdansk that really changed history. So that had a big impact on me, and a big reason I ended up doing what I've been doing with my career.
In what way?
Well, again, my sense of being in Poland, I wanted to be part of the sort of active political community life. I saw that the big frustration of my friends in Poland was that there was no way to do that there, and they missed it, which made me think, gee, I have this opportunity. And then I saw that folks seized that opportunity, and the solidarity, and it was students connecting with labor union members and together doing something important. And so that made me realize what an opportunity I have to make a difference as well.
And so in what ways do you make a difference? I mean, how do you think that changed sort of what you do?
Partly is how I imagine my career. I mean, I don't view my career as staying in one place and billing hours and coming home and waking up one day and it's my retirement party. I mean, my concept of my career has always been to seize opportunities, and so I've done a variety. I've had a base of a law firm, Brown and Bain, that has allowed me to do this, but I took a 3-year leave of absence to go back to Washington, D.C. I was a part-time lawyer for several years, being able to be a state senator, run for office successfully, run for office unsuccessfully. So that's been a lot of fun, to have a base of a place where I can come back to that's home, people I know, but on the other hand, taking opportunities when they come, and sometimes ones that are completely unexpected.
Like what?
Well, I went back to Washington, D.C. to be the chief counsel for the drug czar's office. And I agonized about the decision to go back. I had heard good things and bad things about working for General Barry McCaffrey. And I went back there, and it was a great experience. He was probably the most difficult client a lawyer could have. On the other hand, we did some really good stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I met my wife at that office. She was a policy analyst there. And through a typical series of Washington, kind of stories, I ended up getting appointed by President Clinton to be General Counsel of the Army. Never imagined I'd be in the Pentagon. But again, found that a really exciting experience as a lawyer. It was completely different than what I expected. The range of issues was amazing. I got to travel all over the world. Went to Kosovo, went to Korea, went all over the Middle East. It was it was a great experience. All because I took a chance and went to Washington for a job that I had heard mixed things about, and it turned out to be, two fantastic opportunities.
So let's explore that a little bit more. So, what would you say to students then when they're starting out in terms of the idea of planning a career and also the idea of taking risks and sort of how to do all of that?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I could tell law students is that lawyers, by our very nature, are not risk takers. We're like doctors and accountants. It's a career path that's very easy to lay out, and it's very easy to sort of expect that your first job is going to be the job for the rest of your life. And I think what you need to realize is you're not making a lifetime choice when you choose your first job. And I think what I would urge people to do is look for a really comfortable place that has interesting work, great colleagues, but most importantly, great mentors, people who are going to invest in you and let you be a great lawyer. And then I think the other piece of advice is then take a risk. Don't. Now it may be that politics or appointive office isn't for everybody, but it could be going in-house with a client. Those opportunities come all the time, which could expose you to a business career, which could mean 15 years down the road, you find yourself on the business side not doing law at all. I've had friends who have done that. So I guess it's being open to opportunities. And I guess the final meandering piece of advice I'd give is get active in your community. I mean, that's what led me to run for office in the first place.
Talk a little bit more about that in terms of a specific example of how being active has that kind of result.
Yeah, I'm a Democrat, and I moved to Arizona, which I never would have done if I thought that I was going to be an elected official or be interested in elective office. So I bought a house in Central Phoenix and started working at Brown and Bain, and just decided that I wanted to be involved, and someone advised me if I wanted to get involved in the political campaign, I shouldn't work on the presidential level. I should work at the most local level possible. So I did. I joined the local, District 25 Democrats who had a candidate for the legislature who was running for office. No Democrat had ever represented that district since it had been created 10 years earlier. So and she won, and that made me realize, I could win this too. And the issues that I hear being talked about in the campaign trail were really interesting ones. It was the environment, it was education, it was quality of life for a Central Phoenix historic neighborhoods, and how crime would enter onto that. So there were interesting issues that really moved people. Mm-hmm. So that's what I just seeing that it could be done gave me the idea to run for myself, and I did, and much to my surprise and everyone's surprise, I won.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question. So, students looking at people in office, sometimes they think like it's only the George Bushes with the family connections versus the Bill Clintons who have a background that isn't like super fancy families. And like if I'm a student and I think, oh, I'd like to do that too, can I do it if my family's not very famous or? Oh,
absolutely. And especially in Arizona. Arizona is a really welcoming, open community. It really is. And if you got to be realistic. I mean, if you're a Democrat, you're not going to suddenly win office in East Mesa, or if you're a Republican, you're not going to win office very easily in South Phoenix. So you have to find a community of like-minded folks to run from. But my experience is a lot of folks, very young folks with no family ties, if they just are willing to put the effort into it, can run and win. And I've also come to the conclusion after living in Washington and watching the life of a congressman, watching what they do, that some of the best jobs in politics are the ones that are the least glamorous. It's the city councils, it's the school boards, it's the legislature, and there are a lot of those positions available. And some are nonpartisan. City councils and school boards are nonpartisan. And all those jobs are part-time, which means you practice law, You don't have to live on the low salaries that a lot of these positions offer, and you can make a huge difference. And it can be, if you want to make a political career, if you want to do other things, it can be a launching board. And it can result in my going back to Washington was because I had left the legislature. I was back at Brown and Bain, and Janet Napolitano knew there was a job opening, and told me would I be interested. So I sent in a resume to see what would happen, and that came mainly. I got the job mainly because I had worked on drug issues when I was in the legislature, and because I had served on the board of a treatment facility here in town. So I guess it's the meandering way to answer your question, but the answer is yes. It's very easy for people, I think, if they're willing to put in the effort to run for office.
Do you think it's especially good for lawyers to be in office? I mean,
I was shocked when I went to the Arizona legislature and found that I was one of only 2 people in the Senate who were lawyers. And of the entire legislature, I think at the time there were 4 or 5 of us who were lawyers. So it's actually, Congress is completely different, but at the local level, not. And I think lawyers do offer something unique. I mean, one is we're trained to read statutes. We're trained to look at and pay attention to details. And oftentimes in the political process, in the legislative process, folks who don't know how to read statutes can really do serious damage. And people who don't look out for details can really miss really difficult issues. And finally, we understand the importance, the corporate code. It is not the most exciting thing in the world to work on, but lawyers understand the importance, understand what a huge impact it can have on the community and on the state. And so, a lot of lawyers gravitate to those boring but important jobs that ultimately can have a huge impact.
all right, so let's go back to a little bit about, we're going to back up because we got off track. I got off track. Law school. Did you enjoy law school when you were there, or what was it like?
I did. I did enjoy it. It was, I guess it was very different than what I expected. I was lucky. I ended up with a group of friends that have become lifelong friends. The first 3 people I met became my study group. It was not one of these, trying to find folks who were really, really smart. And I ended up with 3 really supportive people, and we worked well together all throughout law school. And it was fun. It was a completely different experience than college. It was very, very challenging. For us, I grew up in Oregon. For a kid from Oregon, being amongst these folks that I had a lot of respect for, it was scary. But it was also, much to my surprise, like I said, a far more cooperative, less competitive environment than I expected.
And you went to Harvard, didn't you? Okay, so we get a lot of rhetoric about Harvard, Yale, and do you see a difference in there's different opportunities once you go to those schools, but compared to someone watching this at U of A or another school that isn't those top tiers, what do you think in terms of, because you work with lots of people who aren't.
Oh, absolutely. The example I tell people is that my youngest brother went to law school, went to ASU, and ended up getting the same job I did at Brown and Bain. And he's now at a different law firm, but that's an example. If you do well at any law school in the country, and certainly U of A and ASU, which rank higher than a lot of law schools, and they do very well. They're both schools that are on the ascendancy. If you do well at those law schools, you're going to do well professionally. It's not, it is a lot easier, admittedly, graduating from Harvard, to get a job in New York or Los Angeles. But ultimate success, I find at my law firm, usually what law school you went to fades in the background almost immediately.
Do you think there's something different about Harvard that doesn't is there something special? Besides that it's ranked very high, but like when you look back at your experience, do you know what I mean?
No, I think the experience is probably pretty similar. The differences are Harvard's is a much larger law school than U of A or ASU. But I think if you look at the faculty, the faculty was amazing at Harvard, but the professors I met at U of A are just like that, amazing teachers. So I think it's a larger law school. It has a very diverse student body. but because it's large, it's very easy to find your niche. It's no matter what your kind of personality is at Harvard, you're going to find a large group of people who are like you. And at a smaller school, that may be less true, but and it's just amazing students. Folks do very, very well. As I got a great education at Harvard, but I also watched my brother go to Arizona State University. I think if you were to interview him about his law school experience, the same words will come out about his experiences as to mine. So I've learned to become pretty skeptical of the long-term, the long-term impact of going to an Ivy League school versus going to U of A. I think it clearly, from a prestige matter, helps you with your first few years. But that prestige mainly comes in terms of clerkships, and mainly comes in large law firms in cities like Washington, New York, and LA. I think if you plan to practice in Arizona, I think you'll find that it's not that big a difference after all.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit and do some fun things, and then we'll get back to some more serious stuff.
Okay.
We'll take you back to the first days of do you remember what your first day, like when you thought yourself, you are a lawyer? Do you remember that day? And what was that day like? When you said, I'm a lawyer now. Like, it may have been, I don't know when that day is. I think it might be subjective in some way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because all throughout my years when I was clerking, I really didn't view myself as a lawyer when I wasn't a member of the bar. So I think it was when I served for a short while as a prosecutor as part of an independent counsel investigation in D.C. before coming back to Arizona. And I became a member of the bar during that experience. And I think it was when I was in a grand jury room working with a witness that it finally dawned on me that if I weren't a lawyer, I wouldn't even be allowed in this room. And then just watching the experience and watching the case I had helped put together about this witness unfold. And watching the attention of the grand jurors as they were taking notes, it finally dawned on me, my gosh, I'm actually doing this. This is for real. This isn't a moot court experience.
What about your most difficult moment? It could be an early moment of being a lawyer, like one of your, like a hard time, like maybe when you're afraid you messed up, or sorts of insecure time or something.
It's hard to come up with the examples. I'll come up with. I might be generic because I don't want to disclose client confidences. But some of the most difficult experiences that I've had as a lawyer have been not conflicts with the opposing side, but oftentimes having what you think is a really good deal, either as a settlement of a case. And then you discover that the negotiation's only half over. You still have to convince your client that what you've managed to accomplish is worth accepting. And then when you first get that, it's extremely difficult because you have your client is sort of saying, "Gee, is this the best you can get? Haven't you thought about this? What about that?" And your obligation as a lawyer is to go back to the other side and try to get some more. And that you worry that the whole deal is going to fall through. But I think what you quickly realize is that actually, my experience has been that's a healthy experience. That means your client gives you a few ideas and a few other ways you can sort of work out for yet a better deal. But I think that's the most difficult thing for a young lawyer is not dealing with the opposing counsel, but realizing that sometimes you've got clients who have very high expectations, and they're going to push you. They're going to push you hard.
And what do you do when they push you too hard?
Well, sometimes you can't be a miracle worker, and so sometimes you just have to develop a trust relationship with a client so that they will know that that this is the best result they're going to get, and that sometimes just takes time. And sometimes you have to let the good deal fall through and continue with another year or two of litigating or whatever let the deal fall through if it's a corporate deal, and then just wait for another moment for that opportunity to come through. and sometimes it's just important to realize that sometimes you can't be so emotionally vested because you are not the client. It's their job to be emotionally invested. It's your job to give all your all, but sometimes you've got to realize that you're ultimately not the principal. You're the attorney. You're the employee or the agent. It is not your ego that should be the one that you worry about.
Has there ever been a time when that's been a hard thing to?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, every lawyer, I think, no matter what their case is, you quickly decide that you're on the side of right and good and justice. It's very rare that you feel like you're just a hired gun, because you live with their client, you work with your client, you see problems with your case, but it's very easy, I think, to be convinced that you're all the rights on your side. And I think part of the maturing process of a lawyer is having some remove and some perspective that lets you understand what the other side is doing. Like I've discovered as a young lawyer, I was convinced that the other lawyers on their side were unreasonable. They didn't know what they were doing. They were incompetent. They were outrageous people with outrageous clients. Now my operating assumption when I'm dealing with opposing counsel is that that their client probably feels as strongly as my client, and part of what our job is to do is to try to figure out what went wrong, and sometimes it's a communication problem, either in what different expectations of what they wanted to accomplish, and then the relationship fell through. But sometimes I find the best thing you can do as a lawyer is just not assume the worst of the other side, but assume the best, and try to work through the problem. And sometimes it can almost become psychological. Sometimes it can be there's anger on so much both sides. You just realize you got to let the anger work its way out. In a few months of work, and can work that out, and then they're really ready to be rational and really try to resolve the situation.
How do you know when that's that case? I mean, we were trying to give students a sense of clients and sort of dealing with clients, and that they're more than just a legal problem to be worked out from research kind of thing. And that seems really tricky to know when it's, that they just need a few months to cool off kind of thing versus like there's a problem.
Right. Well, I think what I've come to the conclusion is that part of your job as a lawyer is to really get to know your client, and not just this problem of your client. I mean, if your client's a corporation, especially, it's very easy to just focus like a laser on the contract that you're dealing with, and what went wrong in this deal. I think you can do that and you can be a mediocre lawyer, but if you're really going to be a really good lawyer and really provide really good advice to your client, you need to understand your client's business and understand whether this is just an irritant for your client, or whether this is a real barrier to an initiative your client wants to do. And so what I try to do is I try to check the web pages of my clients. If I can check out every day, I try to get their press releases and read their annual reports. When I meet a client, find out what else they're doing, and try to get to know the business people as well as the folks that are inside. And I find that helps me put this case in perspective.
What are you looking for when you're doing all of that? Well,
I'm trying to get a sense of what is really important to the client. And this works for individuals as well. I mean, what is it they're trying to accomplish either with their businesses? What is it they're trying to accomplish? What kind of new products they're going to go in? So then you can put the dispute you're dealing with in some context. So, for example, if the dispute is with an important supplier, a person who's been supplying stuff to your client for years and years and years, the worst thing you can do is destroy that relationship by your own over-aggressive handling of the dispute. I mean, that may in the microcosm you may win that litigation at the expense of something that was far more important to the client, which is the maintaining of that relationship. On the other hand, it may be the case that what looks to you like a real loser of a case, of a low percentage outcome, and so we should settle it on the cheap. You may understand that this may be the tip of the iceberg, and that if you allow a settlement of this case, for nuisance value, you may end up with hundreds of other folks coming after the fact. Or it could be, for example, a patent where if you don't invalidate this patent, a whole product area may not be available to your client. So sometimes what look like little disputes should be treated as if they're a bet your company kind of case. But you only know that if you get to know your client. And I think that goes for individuals as well. I mean, if all you know about your client in a family matter is, their relationship with their husband or wife that's resulting in a divorce and the finances, but don't really get to know how they tick. I mean, are they religious? Are they not religious? How committed they are to their kids? Is there a different vision they have of how they want to raise their kids than the other spouse? These kinds of issues, you only get to know what's important to a client when you get to know them.
What if you get to know them and don't like them? What if you find things out that you had just icky? What do you do then? Do you just ignore it, or?
Well, I mean, when you're a younger lawyer in a law firm, it's tough because you're sometimes stuck working with that client. I mean, sometimes you have no choice. As you get more senior, then it's really an economic decision you have to make. It's a value decision you have to make, which is do you want this client? So as a younger lawyer, I think you just got to you realize I'm a young lawyer. This is a learning experience. I'll learn from this. Mm-hmm. I'll move on.
Did you ever have any of those kind of experiences?
I was fairly lucky. I mean, I had a few matters where I thought a client was being very unreasonable and being systemically unreasonable, in how they dealt with things. Fortunately, I only worked on one matter for that client, and I think it was sort of a mutual agreement that they would go on to someone else at the firm. But I've been pretty lucky. I find actually that the real danger is just the opposite. The real danger is that is what I talked about earlier, that you become so convinced that all truth and light and justice is on your client's side that you sometimes lose sight of the perspective of the other side. And let's face it, 90% of all disputes are ultimately settled. And I think a lawyer that really understands the interests that are at stake on the other side is in the best position to come up with an early, just resolution that meets the needs of your client as well.
What's your favorite part about being a lawyer?
I think my favorite part about being a lawyer is the student in me. Every new case is a learning opportunity. And it's not learning about the law, that can be fun. But for me, it's learning about a new area of the world I never knew about. I mean, for example, when I was at the drug czar's office, I expected to be working on sentencing issues, and I did. And I expected to be working on law enforcement issues, and I did. But I never expected to be working with the advertising industry, but I did. And because we did a media campaign, so I was there from the beginning, and so I was working a lot with the advertising folks, and that had the legal issues were easy. It was mainly contractual issues and those kinds of issues. But the fun part of being a lawyer was I learned a lot about how the advertising industry works. I got to meet a lot of really creative, advertising copywriters. I learned how advertising companies work and operate. Then went to the Army, and I found the Army was going through a similar experience with their recruiting campaigns. I got to use that knowledge when I was working with the Army. But that's what's fun. And with my present position, we do a lot of work for high technology companies, and it's always fun to learn what a high tech company is doing. Usually, the disputes are over cutting edge products, and you sort of learn how that box that's called your computer works, and that can be a lot of fun. I have another client is Best Western. You see the Best Western signs, but I never realized how it operated, and it's not a franchise organization. It's actually a membership organization where it's like a club. Members, every hotel you see with the Best Western's a member of this club, and that was getting to know that, the history and how that kind of huge worldwide chain operates. It can be a lot of fun. So for me, the fun thing about about being a lawyer is the most fun is getting to know new areas of the world that you never otherwise would get exposed to.
And the worst part?
Worst part, I think, is, and some people may thrive on this, but for me, the worst part is the conflict. That could be some things can be very contentious, and you have a sense that if you could only break through the emotions, and break through the posturing, we could actually end up with something worthwhile doing. And so I still find it that kind of really intense conflict uncomfortable, and my stomach churns and my heart beats. I realize intellectually now that conflict can oftentimes result in creative solutions to problems that and better solutions than sort of let's all be friends now, only to push in the future conflict. The conflict is inevitable, but still I find it extremely uncomfortable.
What about mediation, arbitration, all those sorts of things? Do you see that as a better way to go than, say, litigation? Or
I guess my experience has been that almost all disputes are negotiated and are resolved. But some of the best settlements that I've seen have really not been facilitated by third parties. They really haven't. I mean, they basically have been done because the both sides were ready to do a deal, and both sides had thought hard about what was important to them. My experiences with mediations tend to be that if they don't come at the right time, all you get are posturing. That being said, for some disputes, I think quick and dirty arbitration, where you don't invest millions of dollars or thousands of dollars in discovery, can make a lot of sense as well. But I think a good lawyer, a very important part of a lawyer's skills is negotiation skills, and I think so I think that some of the best lawyers are the ones that can negotiate a deal by themselves.
and what about the future of the profession? If you could make it go the way you'd want it to go versus maybe the way it may be going, are there differences in that? I mean,
yeah, I think the immense economic pressures are not healthy right now. I mean, I think and this has been going on for not just this year, but for many years. But the intense pressure on on billable hours, the intense pressure on getting business and the business side, I think is hurting things that I hold dear, like significant pro bono commitments, such as lawyers having family lives that are healthy and community lives that are fulfilling. So that's my biggest concern. And the big associate salary increases we saw before the .com destruction, I think it had some really adverse consequences and all of that. I think it increased the pressures. The other pattern that I find somewhat disturbing is sort of I guess I would call it the nationalization of the law firm experience, where we're moving to many mega law firms that have offices in many, many cities. And so what you're seeing are basically, instead of true partnerships or small groups of folks that are in a common endeavor together, you're seeing a corporation. And I think you're beginning to see some of the larger firms beginning to act as corporations. They're doing layoffs. I mean, my law firm would never do a layoff. Not because we're good people, it's just that it's just too personal when you're a law firm of 80 people. Yes, people leave because they're not successfully growing at the firm, but just to lay someone off because even though they're a good lawyer,
right.
We're not going to. So I think that to me is disturbing, and it'd be nice to find a way to maintain sort of the old style. Maybe it's naive, but the old style of smaller firms that really are folks engaged in a common endeavor.
Do you think by creating a culture that's a culture of cooperation for law, it's going to change the notion of what law is, or will there be a backlash that sort of people will rebel against that, or because it seems like the big firms sort of drive a lot of what goes on?
Yeah, I think the big issue is clients. If clients are willing to understand that not all great wisdom is at the bigger firms, then then that will mean that you don't have to join a large 3,000 lawyer firm in order to have a great, exciting career. But the difficult thing is, I think, if you're the CEO of a company looking for a patent lawyer, you know your board won't criticize you if you go to a big New York firm. They might criticize you if you go to some Phoenix, 50 lawyer firm you've never heard of, even though that 50 lawyer firm, has some really talented folks. So part of it's the clients being willing to take the risk of going to smaller firms. And second of all, requires that those of us who are wanting to maintain our independence in smaller firms like mine, we need to do a better job of letting the world know of our talents. And so far we've been successful. But I just realized that I don't think a corporation-style law firm would have allowed me to run for office and be a part-time lawyer for 4 years, or would have been so thrilled when I got an opportunity to go to Washington. Well, my small 80-lawyer firm, viewed me as one of their own, doing great things, and was very supportive. So so part of it's personal, but that's my biggest concern, is that if we move toward the mega firms, we're gonna lose one of the fun things about being a lawyer, which is being involved in the community, being involved politically, being on boards of directors of organizations, that's what I think is at risk.
Okay, we're going to switch topics.
Okay.
Family.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how your family fits into being a lawyer, or how your law fits into being part of a family.
Well, I got married late in life. Just got married this year with someone I had met when I was in Washington. What I'm noticing is, when you're single, you think nothing of being at the firm at 8 o'clock at night and going out to dinner, coming back to work. When you're married, I feel like my time at the firm, I'm going to be incredibly efficient, get done what I want to get done, so I can go home and see my wife. And I know that pressure to go home and to have a quality time off on the weekends will only increase if we have children. I think the biggest danger, one of the biggest problems for a lot of folks who do get married right out of law school and start having children, face the biggest challenge of their life is going to be they're brand new in a profession at a law firm, and they're trying hard to be impressive, trying hard to bill the hours that need to be billed, but you're by nature, you're brand new, so you're inefficient, and so you feel powerless at work, but you feel incredible pressure to perform on one hand. On the other hand, you have obligations to a brand new family, and I think the biggest mistake young lawyers can do in that circumstance is choose career and profession over the other aspects of their life. I mean, I've seen too many, divorces, or kids that say, "Does Daddy live here anymore?" because he's traveling so much. That kind of pressure, I think, can be really damaging, and it takes a lot of strength of character. I think I was lucky; I didn't need to face that, but I did watch some of my colleagues have the strength of character to have a balance in their lives. And the biggest mistake I think a young lawyer can make is to have no balance.
Do you think you could have done what you did if you had a family or a wife?
I think with a wife, yes, but with kids, I don't know. I mean, I made the decision this year not to run for Attorney General, which I had always been thinking about, planning on doing. But when the decision really faced me, I realized, that the worst thing I could do is to run for statewide office and be on the road in my first year of marriage. That would have been completely horrible, and it was a very selfish decision. My wife was very willing, to support me in whatever I wanted to do, but I just realized that, life has to have its priorities and a sense of balance, and I think, so I guess that's an example of it. It does become more difficult when you have other obligations, and I think actually it's easier once you're settled into a family life to take off these periods of a year or two where you're doing a trial, or a year or two where you're running for office, or a year or two where you're doing a big deal, as long as you you've made it clear. Otherwise, in other years, what comes first. And I've seen some incredibly successful lawyers make that balance. I mean, Paul Eckstein at my law firm has raised a family. He is extremely active in the community. He's a very high-profile lawyer, and he's just found a way to balance all these community, family, work. And my sense is one reason he's a good lawyer is because he has that sense of balance, that he's got a broader perspective. He's got better judgment than lawyers who focus single-mindedly just on their work, don't do anything in the community, and ignore their families. I mean, my sense is that they ultimately aren't as good lawyers, don't have as good judgment. But I have no easy answers, though, because I think that's the biggest challenge a lot of the young lawyers face is the incredible work pressures. And it's so easy to give up other aspects of their lives because of those work pressures.
What about pro bono? You had mentioned that earlier. Sort of your thoughts about it, or the role it plays in your life, or what you think it should play in people's lives.
Well,
More about you.
Yeah. Most lawyers I know who, if you ask them what was their favorite case or what they find most fulfilling, more than 50% of the time they'll mention a pro bono case they handled.
We found that to be the case too.
I mean, my favorite cases were political asylum cases I did as a brand new associate. I did several of them, and I just found that incredibly satisfying because you realize, look at they win political asylum, and you realize you have just completely changed their lives, and you get to know them, you get to understand, what consequences would have been if they had been deported, and then years later, I mean, I had one client from El Salvador that I represented in a political asylum matter. He prevailed and brought his family to the United States, and then about 10 years later, the receptionist called and said, someone was here to see you, and it was his son, who at the time was 10 years old. And he had come for he was getting married, and he wanted to help do the immigration papers for his wife-to-be. And I told him I was unable to do that. I was not confident to do that, but refer him elsewhere. But in the meantime, talking to him, and what are you doing now? Well, I'm studying engineering at Arizona State University. And well, how's your father doing? It's great. He bought a house. He's remarried. And so you just realize there's a happy story. I mean, it was a struggle, but there's also this incredible. Here's a kid who's going to be an engineer. Whose life in El Salvador would have been completely different. So I think pro bono cases can be incredibly personally satisfying. And especially at large firm environments, it can be the best opportunity you get to actually get in court, do a trial that's yours. And the other advantage of, I find with pro bono is you can usually, anyone can find something that fits their values. I mean, you don't have to be a liberal do-gooder type to do pro bono. There's a lot of organizations out there you can do work for, regardless of whatever your values or political beliefs are.
Okay, we're going to skip around. It's all kind of
Sure.
Stress. How do you deal with stress?
What I try to do, I try to get to the gym every day, which is something I didn't do before, but I've just learned. I mean, I find that's the biggest stress reliever for me is to get the gym every day. I also live only a mile and a half from work, and so when it's not unbearably hot, I walk to and from work. I find the walk to work has a relaxing sort of sense of getting me ready to work, and I find even more importantly, the half an hour walk between work and home lets me leave work at work, and so I don't come home completely stressed. So I find physical activity for me is the best way, and partly it's too the balance. It's if you define your entire life, your entire well-being by your work, I think you're going to find the stress almost unbearable. But I think if you realize that you've got a lot of other things going on in your life, it's a lot easier to sort of deal with the stress at work or the stress at home. If you have balance, then different parts of your life can be a source of comfort at different times.
Okay. there's a couple of more topics. We're going to just do hodgepodge.
Okay.
Intellectual property. There's some movements that intellectual property should be a core first-year class, that it's become that important enough to be part of the curriculum. And I wanted to know what you thought about that.
I guess my recommendation is it should be touched on in the traditional property class. It should be a part of what you study. But my sense of what the first year is all about, it's not about content. It's about getting to think and learn like a lawyer. And the difficulty of intellectual property is that it really isn't appreciably different in terms of the methodology than any other area of the law. Some of it's highly statutory, some of it's highly case-oriented. And so I think it's silly to think about the first year curriculum in terms of content. I would recommend that it be treated like evidence, that it's a highly recommended elective that most people take. Because if you're going to be a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, I'd rather you do something that's going to help you become a better prosecutor or defense attorney than just foist patents onto you. But I think you should understand it and be touched on it. Because I think most lawyers are going to be exposed to it in some way in their career. I mean, if a family lawyer, it could be part of the estate, or if part of the estate you're helping a family plan with, or part of the estate you're dividing. Even in criminal law, I mean, there are criminal statutes that deal with this area. So I think it should be touched on so you know how to look it up. But I think I don't think it needs to be in the first year curriculum, because I think about what the first year does for you. I think is it exposes you mainly to the various methodologies and areas of looking at law. I mean, some areas are very case oriented, and so your contract law and the tort law teaches you how to deal with case law. A lot of other law is statutory and code driven. The UCC portions of contract and the Civil Procedure Code class help you deal with that. And then there's sort of grand constitutional principles that pervade everything that I think you should be exposed to. So I think the value of the first year is to mainly expose you to the different ways lawyers deal with different parts of the law. And I think I never took patents or copyrights, and even though that's a lot of what I deal with, I think that's something I was able to teach myself because of other classes I took in law school that were completely unrelated.
Okay, what about being a good clerk? Tips, suggestions for students. You clerked a couple, at least how many years did you clerk? 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. And suggestions? Good tips you learned?
Well, first, the biggest thing is selecting a clerkship. And I think a lot of folks get so focused on the prestige of the judge and the court. And that's great and it's important, but I would instead focus on how good a mentor is that judge going to be, because that's really the best thing about a clerkship, is that you have a one-on-one relationship with a judge. I mean, 4 clerks or 3 clerks or 2 clerks, regardless which court you're on, that's a very small, intimate relationship. So choosing a judge who's going to be a real good mentor, who's going to help your writing, who's going to talk to you about what's happening in the courtroom, and sort of give you a blow-by-blow about how they're thinking about a case, I think can be worth its weight in gold.
How do you do that? How do you find that out?
Talk to other people who've clerked for those judges before. Judges have reputations, and I think and it will vary. And I was very lucky. I had both Judge Edwards in the D.C. Circuit, who I clerked for, and Justice O'Connor were incredible teachers. I mean, Edwards was a former law professor, and that pervaded how he dealt with chambers. My brother clerked for Judge Canby. He's a former professor, and that really pervaded how he clerked. But once you get to the clerkship,
let me ask you
sure.
before. So, did you do that? Did you sort of seek out to see if they would be good mentors, or did you luck out?
Well, for Judge Edwards, yes, I did. I mean, I when I was choosing which places to interview, because there's hundreds of judges, and so when you're applying for your first clerkship, then you really can be selective, and I just heard wonderful things about Harry Edwards, and so it was easy. And most judges probably are in that category, but I had a really lucky experience. With O'Connor, I have to admit, I applied to all 9 Supreme Court justices, and I guess my rule about being selective about the Supreme Court is if you get an offer, you take it. It gives us a great experience regardless of the quality of your judge, just the experience of clerking in the Supreme Court.
Well, we'll get back to the other tips. We've talked to others who clerked for the Supreme Court, and they've had different, very, very different experiences on what they did on their daily life. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what you did, how involved you were with her, and sort of how her process. Because we've got it all the way back from Professor Ayers, so we've got a really nice cross section of people.
Yeah, well, we were involved in every aspect of the court. First, we were part of what's called the cert pool. All the justices put all the clerks in a pool, and we divide amongst all the clerks all the cert petitions, and you would write a memo summarizing the petition, the issue, and making recommendations. And that was really a good bulk of the work we did. I mean, that's a huge volume of cases. It's over 1,000 a year are filed, and only 10% got accepted. So that was part of what we did. It was really routine. And that's not different with any of the other justices. But we also wrote, for each of the cases that were accepted for argument, we wrote very extensive bench memos. And what she really wanted us to do was go beyond the briefs, and in fact challenge the briefs. Let her know, for example, is the authority being used appropriately? Are the litigants missing an issue? Has there been some good scholars out there who've written really good law review articles that she should read? So it really was not just here's what one side said, here's what one side said, but what O'Connor really wanted was for you, because she read the briefs very carefully herself. What she wanted was a smart young lawyer to take the extra step and offer other helpful thoughts that could be useful to her.
Did that go beyond the law stuff? I mean, did it go into, like, sometimes there's so much data and there's things like that, or people relying on things? I mean, is it just a legal space, or is it beyond sort of that legal realism thing of sort of how far do you go?
Well, with Justice O'Connor, she really is a lawyer's lawyer in how she deals with cases, and so by and large it was legal principles. But at the Supreme Court you have the ability to create, and to depart, and so that's why she was interested in scholarly opinion about an alternative approach to an area of the law. I mean, she was very interested always in that. Sometimes a case is about statistics. I mean, for example, we had McCleskey versus Kemp when I was clerking for O'Connor. That was about whether the Georgia death penalty system was racially biased, and in that it really required the bench memo. A good bench memo for any justice would go into the study, explain what it really said, and try to parse the data, because that was partly what was issued, in addition to the legal issues. And then the fun part of the clerkship with her was once the bench memos were written, we would meet on a Saturday before oral argument. She would make lunch, bring it in, and we would talk about the cases that were coming up, and we each would have read each other's bench memos, and we would argue and talk and go back and forth about what questions the justice should act, what issues really should be examined, and ultimately how she should come out. And what I found fascinating about O'Connor was she did not hire ideologically. Some chambers that are all conservatives or all liberals. We were, and this is true of all of her clerks. I mean, we were all across the political spectrum, because what she really looked for in clerks was someone who would, one, know that she was the decision maker, she was the justice, we weren't, and second of all, understood therefore our role was to help her. But she was not put off by having clerks who disagree with her. She, I think, rather enjoyed it, and I think it made her a better justice, because she really understood the full gamut of opinion, and she was strong enough as a justice in her own sense of who she was and what she believed, that she could trust a liberal clerk. So it was that was a lot of fun. That was the best part of the job. And then she would come back, then we would go to oral argument and watch the case get oral argued, and she would come back from conference, in the conference of the case, and she would give us a blow-by-blow account of what everyone said. Such a detailed account that other clerks from other chambers would call us because they had to write an opinion and they wanted to know, gee, what, I mean, we had one chambers, they would call and say, we're writing the opinion, is it an affirmal or a reversal? They didn't even know. We could, so we were able to at least say, here it is, it's 5-4, the 5 people said this, and that was a great education for us as to how each of the justices really acted. And then we would do she would give us if we were going to write an opinion, we'd give us a detailed outline of what she wanted, how she wanted it approached, and we would do a first draft, and we would send in the first draft into her chambers with every book and reference and case that we had cited, and she would then take it and turn it into her own voice. So it was a great experience. I mean, a lot of work. We worked long hours, and we were going home. This is not a time to be balanced. I would go home every night at 11 o'clock, and went home at 11 o'clock at night because that's when they turn off the computers. We had a central system, the old-fashioned mainframe, and they turned off the mainframe at 11, and we would all see all these clerks leave the building. But it was a very good experience.
And what about the first one? The first experience?
Great experience. I mean, it was in the D.C. Circuit, so it was a fun court with really interesting cases and issues. Judge Edwards was a law professor at heart. And actually, in terms of how he approached cases and the workload of the clerks, it was virtually identical. I mean, except for the cert petitions. But we did the same detailed bench memos. We did first draft of opinions, and he also would give us a blow-by-blow account of what was said. Plus, he was still very active. He taught every semester, and we acted as assistants to him on his teaching part as well, which was fun. And he was also still an active scholar, and so he was always writing other academic pieces, and we got involved in that as well, and that was fun.
And any specific tips besides just being a good worker with as a clerk?
I guess the most important thing is to know your role. I mean, if you read a lot of books about the Supreme Court, they tend to be written by folks whose only sources were clerks, and so it makes it sound like clerks run the court, because the sources are clerks who overgrandize their involvement, which is, but I guess I don't believe those books. I mean, my experience was the judges really make the decision. Your ability to really influence a judge against their inclinations, I think, is you shouldn't even think about doing that. And so I think if you view your job as helping your judge make the right decision and make sure that they are fully informed, you're going to have a great experience. You're going to be a great law clerk. You're going to have a great relationship with your judge. If you view your job to be the voice of the underdog, or to be the voice of of the Federalist Society, or the voice of the Legal Aid Society within your chambers, you're quickly going to discover that you're doing your boss no good, you're doing your cause no good, and you're not learning from the experience. I guess the final thing I would say is, writing is incredibly important for a law clerk. I mean, and that's the one thing you can probably most improve as a law clerk, but the thing that you most need to focus on is clear, understandable writing. And I guess the final thing is if you can think of what Judge Edwards taught me and what O'Connor taught me, is that the best thing a judge can do is try to get beyond the briefs, because there may be an issue that neither side wants to address that really is the central issue in the case. And it also may be the case that one side is grossly mischaracterizing either the facts or the law, and the other side just didn't spend the time and got lazy and didn't point it out. So your job really is to make sure your judge doesn't make an embarrassing mistake. And the only way to do that is to go beyond the briefs, to not assume that everything in the record is true. So I guess that's.
What do you do when you find conflicting stuff? Like, you're working on something and you find that the record is just a mess, and that like everybody's saying different things, and it doesn't add up, and basically it comes down to what the facts are. I mean, that, obviously you're at the appellate level, so that all that, but it just seems like it's disaster, so that you can't rely on anything that you have.
It can be, but that's when built in our system, I think, are some very healthy, I call it sort of sort of self-effacement. I mean, understand your role, and if you got a really bad record out there, well, your first assumption, your operating assumption is the trial judge was right, and in a factual issue, he had to be very wrong before you overcome that. So if the record is a mess, that usually means you end up affirming, because unless you have a basis for overturning the decision of the trial judge. And so I think that's important. That's another lesson you sort of learn, is that the procedural posture of a case, and a recognition that your job isn't to be a brand new de novo reviewer, but your job instead is to respect the decision below, and then just make sure and challenge, or reverse it only if the burden is met. Now, if it's an issue of law, there is no such difference. But I think that's what helps you get out from under that.
I just lost my question. We're almost to the end, and I've just totally lost my question. Let me just think what it was. It was really important too. I know it was. I can't remember. We'll come back to it. Do you have any other questions or any thoughts? I wish I could remember that. Oh well. I really can't. It's been a long day. I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Well, I guess we're towards the end. Is there any other things that you'd like to tell students, or words of advice, or as they begin this journey of things you wish you had heard when you first started, or anything like that?
I guess the biggest advice I'd give is relax. That I remember thinking that when I was agonizing over which firm to go to, which job offer to accept, and everyone does that, and you treat it as if it's almost like a marriage decision. And the answer is it's not. For most people, this is a place you're going to be for a few years at most. And so if you relax about that decision and make the best decision you can, but realize it's not the only opportunity you're ever going to place you're ever going to work. And I guess the second advice I'd give is don't just rush to the big private law firms. Think hard about other alternatives. My friends that are prosecutors and criminal defense attorneys probably are the happiest group of people on both sides that I've ever met. The public lawyers have a pretty high job satisfaction level. They don't have the money, but there's high job satisfaction. And I think every young lawyer should really at least seek out and learn about those opportunities. You might find the best fit for you is not to go bill a lot of hours at a law firm, but they could be a prosecutor or be an in-house counsel for a government agency. Those are opportunities a lot of lawyers ignore that I think can offer a huge job satisfaction.
I remember my other question. It's because it's not a normal question we ask. You were born in San Diego. You went to school in Oregon. You went to law school and government in Massachusetts. How did you get to Arizona?
My family moved here from Oregon when I was in college, and so and I really, to admit it, when I was in law school, I assumed I'd be going to Washington D.C. and going to a big firm there, and I clerked at a firm. But because Judge Edwards had me start my clerkship before I could take the bar, I couldn't take the bar. I had an extra summer, so I decided, well, I'll make my mom happy. I'll interview in Phoenix, and what I discovered when I interviewed was these firms are doing some really interesting stuff. This is a much more vibrant community than I was expecting. And then I ended up going to Brown and Bain for the summer and loving it. Can you hold on just a second?
Sure.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead.
Which you kind of already answered, but you can answer it again or just say we've already done it, which is what's your happiest moment in law? Which you talked about one of your happy moments about, so I didn't know if you want to do another happy moment.
Well, two. I mean, one is the winning the asylum claim. The second one's a lot more recent, and that was at the Army, where I had the chance to go to Kosovo and meet the young JAG lawyers that are there. And I was in Kosovo right after the ground troops had gone in, and the conditions were not great. They were living in tents, and I guess it wasn't anything I did, but just that experience. I met a young lawyer. He had been a JAG lawyer for a year and a half, and he was just really a young lawyer. And I asked him, well, what have you been doing? Well, I've been creating a legal system. He was creating the system for determining all these Serbs and Albanians they were detaining, under what kind of due process they would decide to really keep them or let them go. And so he had to create a court system. And so this young JAG lawyer, right out of law school, was doing that, and that really made me. It wasn't anything I did, but it made me very proud to be associated with the Army, and also very proud to be a member of the profession. It really reminded me that in a country like Kosovo, where there's no legal system at all, made me realize how important our role is. Despite all the lawyer bashing jokes, it made me realize how important a job we really have.
That's lovely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been great.